Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the god of Shinobi and descended to find a mortal bride? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Descent. The air in Konohagakure had long since settled. The peace, once a fragile, desperate hope purchased with the blood of a generation, had solidified into the bedrock of a new era. Skyscrapers of steel and glass now pierced the same sky that had once been clouded by the smoke of war, their gleaming surfaces reflecting a village that had chosen progress over perpetual conflict. Children with no ledge of ration books or evacuation shelters laughed in sprawling public parks, their biggest concerns being academy exams and the latest flavor of ramen at Ichiraku's. The names of heroes were etched onto monuments, their stories softened into legends for the young. It was a world at peace, prosperous and proud. And into this world, he walked. He appeared at the main gate without fanfare, a man who seemed neither young nor old. Dressed in simple, traveler's clothes. The Chunin guards at the gate, bored from a shift of uneventful paperwork, barely registered him. Yet, as he passed, a stillness followed in his wake. It was not a silence of the ears, but a deep, resonant quiet that settled in the bones. One of the guards shivered, a sudden, inexplicable chill crawling up his spine. He looked at his partner, who was staring blankly at the spot where the man had been, his hand unconsciously resting on the hilt of a kunai he had no reason to draw. "Did you feel that?" the first guard muttered. "Feel what?" his partner replied, though his voice was a fraction too tight. He hadn't felt anything, not precisely. It was more like the brief, terrifying realization a fish might have that the water it swims in is part of an ocean impossibly vast. The feeling was gone as quickly as it came, leaving only a faint sense of unease. They dismissed it. It was a peaceful time. Anomalies were to be filed and forgotten. The man, Naruto, walked through the bustling streets with an ancient patience in his stride. He saw the faces of the Uchiha on the uniforms of the military police force, a symbol of trust rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy. He saw the crest of the Hyuga on a state-of-the-art medical facility, their sight now turned toward healing. He passed the academy, and the sound of children practicing the Rasengan. His Rasengan brought the faintest hint of a smile to his lips. He had watched this world, nurtured it from a distance for centuries, a silent, unseen guardian. But watching was no longer enough. The silence of his divine domain had become a crushing weight. The echoes of past conversations, the ghosts of friends long turned to dust, were poor company. He had come seeking the one thing his power could not create, a genuine connection. He did not need to ask for directions. The path to the Hokage Tower was as familiar to him as the beat of his own heart. He walked past security checkpoints, through barriers designed to detect hostile chakra, and no alarm was raised. The shinobi on duty, the most elite Jonin, saw him, their eyes would skim over him, and their minds would simply edit him out. He was not using a genjutsu, no clever jutsu of invisibility. His presence was simply so immense, so far beyond their comprehension of power, that their senses refused to properly acknowledge it. It was like trying to see the entire sky at once. The mind rebels and focuses on a single, manageable cloud instead. Konohamaru Sarutobi, the 8th Hokage, was drowning. The sea was made of paper, and the waves were reports on trade disputes, budget allocations, and the ever-present, soul-crushing requests for mission re-evaluations. He looked older than his years, the wig of the hat heavier than his grand-uncle had ever worn. He rubbed his temples, letting out a groan that was pure, undiluted exhaustion. That was when he felt the air in his office change. The oppressive humidity of the late summer afternoon vanished, replaced by an atmosphere as crisp and clean as a winter morning. The frantic scratching of his pen on paper was suddenly the only sound. He looked up. A man was standing before his desk. His Anbu guards, 4 of the most lethal shinobi in the village, were frozen in the corners of the room, their bodies rigid, not with tension, but with a profound, instinctual paralysis. They were statues in porcelain masks. "Who are you?" Konohamaru demanded, his hand dropping below his desk, fingers brushing against the seal that would summon his personal guard. "How did you get in here?" The man's eyes, a blue so deep they seemed to hold the memory of the sky itself, met his. "There are no doors that can hold me, 8th. The voice was calm, yet it resonated with an authority that made the title of Hokage feel like a child's game. "As for who I am, you have a statue of me in the valley at your border." Konohamaru froze. A joke. It had to be a prankster, a powerful one. But a prankster nonetheless. Many people claim to be legends. Do they? The man tilted his head slightly. He made no grand gesture, performed no impossible feat. He simply let a sliver of his true nature bleed into the room. Konohamaru felt it not as a wave of chakra, but as a shift in reality itself. The light from the window seemed to bend around the man, the dust motes in the air stilled. And the very concept of threat, of being able to fight back, evaporated from the Hokage's mind. It was the absolute certainty of a mountain facing a pebble. The mountain does not need to prove its strength. It simply is. "I am Naruto," the man said, and the name settled the matter. It took less than an hour for the emergency council to be convened. The room was a tense mix of clan heads, civilian advisors, and the highest-ranking shinobi. Whispers filled the chamber, rumors of a breach, of a being of unimaginable power seated calmly in the Hokage's waiting room. Sakura Haruno entered with a clipped, efficient stride that betrayed her inner turmoil. As the director of the Konoha General Hospital and one of the world's foremost medical nin, her life was a constant exercise in controlled chaos. She had rebuilt the village's medical infrastructure from the ground up after the Fourth Great War, and her pragmatism was as legendary as her strength. When Konohamaru's frantic summons had reached her, mentioning an entity claiming to be the Naruto Uzumaki, her first thought hadn't been awe, but damage control. Beings of that power level were not friends or allies, they were geopolitical events. Forces of nature that could shatter the delicate peace she had dedicated her life to protecting. When he was led into the council chamber, the whispers died. He moved with a quiet grace that seemed at odds with the sheer power that radiated from him. He took his place in the center of the room, his calm gaze sweeping over the faces of Konoha's leaders. The council elders, men and women who had navigated wars and political coups, stammered with questions of reverence and fear. They asked of the Sage of Six Paths, of the Otsutsuki, of the nature of the afterlife. He answered them with a simple, patient honesty that only deepened the mystery surrounding him. Sakura waited, her green eyes narrowed, analyzing him not as a deity, but as a potential threat. She catalogued his posture, his tone, the steady, rhythmic pulse of his chakra that felt less like a shinobi's and more like the tidal pull of the moon. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the hushed awe. "Let's dispense with the mythology," she said, her tone sharp and direct. "You claim to be Naruto Uzumaki, the god of shinobi. Fine, I'll accept that as a working premise. My question is more practical. Why are you here, and what, exactly, does a god want with a mortal bride?" The directness of the question startled the council. It was bordering on blasphemy. But the man, Naruto, turned his full attention to her. For the first time, his placid expression shifted, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. He saw her not as a worshipper or a politician, but as an equal who dared to question him. "I am here," he began, his voice softening slightly, "because I am lonely." The admission was so profoundly human, so utterly unexpected, that it stunned the room into silence. "I have watched E.M. Perez rise and fall like the turning of the seasons. I have seen generations of your families live and die. I have been a guardian, a watcher, a memory. But I have not lived. I wish to share an existence, not merely observe it. I seek a partner who can see past the legend you speak of, and see the man who bears its weight." His answer was raw, genuine, and it disarmed the tension in the room, replacing it with a confused sympathy. But Sakura's expression remained guarded. She had seen too much to be swayed by a pretty speech, no matter how heartfelt. Loneliness could drive men to do terrible things, what could it drive a god to? Before she could press him further, the world erupted in chaos. A piercing siren blared through the village, the signal for a direct, high-level assault. A Jonin burst into the council chambers. His face pale. "Hokage-sama, the northern wall is under attack. The barrier team was breached instantly. We have an intruder. Their chakra is monstrous." Konohamaru was on his feet. "Evacuate the civilians in the northern sectors. All active Jonin, To the wall. Sakura-san, the medical teams. Already mobilizing. Sakura cut in, her mind instantly shifting into crisis mode. The debate was over. A real, tangible threat was at their gates. As she turned to leave, her eyes met Naruto's. He hadn't moved. He simply watched, an expression of profound disappointment on his face, as if he had expected this. The scene at the northern wall was one of controlled destruction. The attacker, a figure clad in a blank, white mask and the robes of a forgotten sect, moved with brutal efficiency. Where he walked, the earth erupted. Massive, thorny trees of a corrupted wood release tore through buildings, their branches lashing out like sentient whips. Konoha's elite shinobi, heroes in their own right, were being systematically dismantled. A volley of fireballs would be swallowed by a wall of writhing wood. A lightning-fast taijutsu assault would be met with wooden spikes erupting from the ground. Sakura arrived to a battlefield that was rapidly becoming a slaughterhouse. "Get the wounded back," she commanded, her fists glowing with the green chakra of her medical jutsu. She moved through the chaos, her strength of 100 seal coursing through her as she shattered a wooden golem with a single, precise punch, buying her medics precious seconds to drag an injured Chunin to safety. She could feel the attacker's chakra. It was immense, but worse, it was wrong. It felt wild, hateful, a perversion of the first Hokage's life-giving power. Just as the masked Ma-En raised his hands to unleash a technique that was gathering a terrifying amount of nature energy, a technique that Sakura knew would shatter the entire northern district, a figure appeared on the battlefield. Naruto walked through the maelstrom of violence as if strolling through a garden. A stray wooden projectile, thick as a tree trunk and moving fast enough to level a building, veered sharply as it neared him, arcing harmlessly over his head as if repelled by an unseen force. He didn't look at the chaos, the fires, or the wounded. His eyes were fixed solely on the attacker. "Enough," he said. The word was not a shout, yet it carried over the din of battle, silencing it completely. The masked man, momentarily stunned by his appearance, unleashed his ultimate attack. A tsunami of splintered wood, monstrous faces roaring within the grain, surged forward, a wave of pure destruction meant to overwhelm and obliterate. Naruto didn't counter with a jutsu of his own. He didn't form a hand seal or summon a creature. He simply raised one hand, palm open. The wave of wood stopped. It froze in midair, inches from him, every thorn and splinter held in perfect stasis. Then, a change began. The vibrant, malevolent green of the wood began to fade. Life, the very chakra that fueled the technique, was being undone. The massive constructs turned a sickly gray, then crumbled, not into splinters, but into fine, lifeless dust that scattered on the wind. The most powerful wood release seen in a century had been unmade with a gesture. Silence descended upon the battlefield. Every shinobi, friend and foe alike, stared in utter disbelief. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Naruto was standing in front of the masked man. There was no flicker of movement, no burst of speed. He was simply there. He placed his hand on the man's forehead. "The will that drives you is not your own," he said, his voice laced with a sadness that was centuries old. "Sleep now." The attacker's malevolent chakra, a raging inferno moments before, was instantly extinguished, snuffed out like a candle flame. The man's body went limp, collapsing to the ground, unconscious. Naruto looked at the gash in the village wall, the ruined homes, the terrified faces of the shinobi. He sighed, a soft sound of weary resignation. He raised his hand one more time. The broken stones of the great wall lifted from the rubble, seamlessly knitting themselves back together. The craters in the earth filled in, the ground smoothing over as if the battle had never happened. He wasn't rebuilding, he was rewinding me itself for that small patch of the world. He walked over to Sakura, who was standing frozen, her medical chakra still glowing around her hands, her mind struggling to process the sheer, impossible scale of what she had just witnessed. He was not a shinobi. He was something else entirely. He gestured to the unconscious form on the ground. "His chakra is tainted," Naruto said quietly, his voice pulling her from her shock. "It is corrupted by an old, familiar malice. A shadow I had hoped was long since vanquished." The mention of a tangible medical problem was the anchor Sakura needed. Her training took over, and she knelt beside the attacker, her hands glowing as she began a diagnostic scan. The chakra pathways were a mess, burned out from the inside, but she could feel the faint, lingering trace of what he spoke of. It was a cold, parasitic energy, unlike anything she had ever encountered. Naruto watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw her composure, the immediate shift from warrior to healer. The intense focus in her eyes. She wasn't looking at him with fear or adoration now. She was looking at the problem. "You were right to question me, Sakura Haruno," he said, and the use of her full name felt deliberate. A sign of respect. A power like mine should not be trusted easily. It invites challenges. It draws out the darkness. Sakura looked up from the patient, her green eyes meeting his blue ones. In that moment, she saw a flicker of the crushing isolation he had spoken of in the council chamber. The burden of a power that could unmake the world with a thought. For the first time, she saw past the god, past the living legend, and saw a man standing in the middle of a problem far bigger than a hole in a wall. The descent had been made. The peace was broken, and, in the unsettling quiet of the perfectly restored battlefield, a new, far more dangerous era for Konoha, and the world, had just begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers and Warnings. The quiet that followed the attack was more unnerving than the chaos itself. In the sterile, white light of the Konoha hospital's most secure forensic lab, Sakura Haruno stood over the body of the masked assailant. The physical damage was minimal. Naruto's intervention had been so absolute that the man had simply stopped. But Sakura's diagnostic jutsu told a different story. She had run the scan a dozen times, EACH result more impossible than the last. His chakra coils are completely inert, she murmured, more to herself than to the only other person in the room. It's not depletion, like he's used up all his energy. It's an absence, as if they were never there to begin with. The very pathways are dissolving. It's medically inconceivable. Naruto stood by the observation window, his arms crossed, his gaze distant. The reflection in the glass showed a man bearing an ancient weight. "It is not a medical condition," he said, his voice low. "It is consumption. What you are seeing is the husk left behind when the soul's energy is devoured." Sakura deactivated her jutsu, a frown creasing her brow. "Devoured? By what?" "A hunger," he replied simply. "An echo of a will that believes all chakra belongs to it." I felt its touch on him. A faint but unmistakable stain. I had thought it scattered to nothingness ages ago, but it seems a fragment endured. It found a host, twisted his power, and when he was defeated, it abandoned the vessel and took its gift back. He turned from the window, his deep blue eyes meeting hers. This attack was not random. It was a test, a probe. Someone, or something, wanted to gauge Konoha's strength. Perhaps they wanted to gauge mine. Sakura's mind, always racing, was already connecting the dots. A power that perverts would release, a mysterious entity that consumes chakra. And an attack on Konoha the moment a divine being reveals himself. This was not a simple invasion. It was a move on a global chessboard, and Naruto's arrival had just overturned the entire board. "The other villages will have detected the chakra spike from the battle," she stated, her voice all business. "They will be demanding answers. The peace we've built is stable, but it's not unbreakable. A being of your power appearing in Konoha, they will see it as a shift in the balance of power." "A threat, I know," Naruto said with a hint of resignation. "That is why the Hokage is currently drafting a summons for a 5-cage summit. And it is why I must attend." The summons, sent by the fastest birds and encoded with the highest level of diplomatic urgency, sent ripples across the continent. In Kumogakure, the 5th Raikage, Darui let out a weary sigh, the smoke from his cigarillo curling around his head. "A god, huh," he drawled to his advisors. "Just when I was getting used to the paperwork. Troublesome." Despite his languid demeanor, his eyes were sharp. He knew what this meant. In Iwagakure, the 4th Tsuchikage, Kuretsuchi, slammed her fist on her desk, cracking the solid oak. "Arrogant leaf dogs. They shelter a weapon of mass destruction and call him a god, expecting us to just roll over. I'll hear what they have to say, but if I smell a power play, I'll turn their precious village into a crater." From the quiet, windswept offices of Sunagakure, the 5th Cage, Gaara read the scroll with a calm, unreadable expression. He felt the familiar, overwhelming presence of his oldest friend's chakra. an energy he had not sensed in its true magnitude since the war. But this was different. It was older, deeper, calmer. He felt not a threat, but a profound sense of sorrow radiating from it. He would go, not as a suspicious rival, but as a concerned friend. The emergency summit was convened in the Land of Iron, a neutral territory of snow and steel, its samurai mediators sworn to a code of impartiality. The air in the meeting hall was colder than the wind outside. The 5 Kage sat at a circular table, their advisors and guards standing behind them, a silent testament to the tension. Sakura was there, not as a guard, but as a delegate. She was Konoha's foremost expert on the biological and chakra-related evidence from the attack, and her presence lent a scientific credibility to what would otherwise sound like a mad fairy tale. She stood behind Konohamaru, who looked small and beleaguered under the combined glares of his counterparts. They waited. Then, the heavy doors of the chamber opened, and Naruto walked in alone. He wore no cage hat, no ceremonial robes. He was still in the simple, unassuming attire of a traveler. But as he entered, the samurai guards instinctively gripped the hilts of their katanas, and every shinobi in the room felt a primal urge to either kneel or flee. The air grew heavy, thick with a power that felt less like chakra, and more like a fundamental law of physics. He took a seat offered by Konohamaru, not at the head of the table, but as an equal part of the circle. He offered a slight nod to the assembly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Kuretsuchi scoffed, breaking the silence. "We didn't have much of a choice, did we? When a ghost from the history books decides to flatten a section of a village and then rebuild it with a wave of his hand, it tends to get our attention. So, let's stop with the pleasantries. What are you, and what do you want?" Naruto's gaze settled on her, calm and unflinching. "I am what the stories say I am. As for what I want, I have come to find a wife." The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the statement left the Tsuchikage speechless. Darui, the Raikage, choked on his smoke, dissolving into a coughing fit that was half sincere, half suppressed laughter. "A wife," Darui managed, wiping a tear from his eye. "You show up with enough power to end the world, and you're here for dating." In a manner of speaking, Naruto replied, his expression unchanging. "My reasons are my own. But my presence is not a declaration of war. Konoha has not gained a weapon, Tsuchikage. They have gained a resident. I have no intention of interfering with the autonomy of your nations. Forgive us if we find that hard to believe." Chojuro, the Mizukage, stammered, his usual anxiety amplified 100-fold. "Power like yours cannot help but interfere. Its very existence changes everything." It was Gaara who finally brought a measure of calm. "Naruto," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We all felt the other chakra during the attack. The one you fought. It was vile, reminiscent of the war." "What was it?" Sakura stepped forward. "The attacker utilized a corrupted form of wood release. Our analysis suggests a biological and chakra-based parasite that amplified his abilities while consuming him from within. When the host was subdued, the entity fled, stripping the body of all chakra in the process." Naruto picked up the thread. "It is a remnant of Kaguya's will. A sliver of her ambition, her desire to reclaim all chakra. It is a mindless thing in some ways, driven by instinct. But it is intelligent enough to seek out powerful hosts and hide in the shadows. It is this lingering will that is the true threat, not I." The revelation sent a chill through the room. The name Kaguya was a curse. A name that signified the end of the world. But deep in the shadows of the Land of Iron, in a secret chamber far from the summit, a different conversation was taking place. "He's using the Otsutsuki as a scapegoat," a withered voice rasped. Homura Mitokado, one of Konoha's oldest elders and a man who had served under the second Hokage, stared at a shadowy projection of the summit. He was surrounded by figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden, but their loyalties clear. They were the last remnants of Danzo Shimura's root, an organization that believed true peace came not from trust, but from absolute control, wielded from the shadows. "He is an anomaly," Homura continued, his voice thin but hard as steel. "A being whose power invalidates the entire shinobi system. He makes Kage irrelevant. He makes armies obsolete. If he is allowed to remain, mortal man will no longer be the master of his own fate. We will be his pets, his children, his slaves. What is the plan, Lord Homura?" A cloaked figure asked. He is too powerful to confront directly. But his presence has made the nations paranoid. We will use that paranoia. We will give them a reason to fear Konoha, to fear him. We will shatter the peace he claims to protect and show the world that a god among men brings only ruin. Homura's eyes glinted. The agent is in place. The summit will not end in agreement. It will end in blood. Back in the main hall, the debate was raging. Kuretsuchi argued for a treaty that would bind Naruto, forcing him to act only with the unanimous consent of all 5 nations. Darui countered that trying to chain a typhoon was pointless, it was better to understand which way the wind was blowing. Naruto listened patiently, his silence a more powerful statement than any argument. Finally, he raised a hand. You speak of leashing me as if I were a beast. You cannot. You debate my intentions as if I were a conqueror. I am not. Your fear, while understandable, is blinding you. He stood up, his presence filling the room. You wish for a demonstration of my intent. Very well. He walked to the center of the circular table. The peace you now enjoy is a delicate thing. It is a house built on a foundation of graves. It is threatened not by my power, but by the same shadows that have always plagued you. Greed, fear, the belief that power is the only true currency. Suddenly, the assassin struck. A cloaked figure, who had been standing behind one of the Land of Iron's samurai generals, moved with impossible speed. It wasn't a chakra-fueled burst, but the refined, silent deadliness of a true professional. A single kunai, its tip coated in a fast-acting, chakra-disrupting poison, flew through the air. The target was not Naruto. It was not one of the cage. It was Mifune, the general of the Land of Iron, the neutral arbiter of the summit. His death would instantly dissolve the talks. It would be an act of aggression within a neutral state, an unforgivable breach of protocol. And the kunai, as everyone could see, was a standard-issue Konoha weapon. It was the perfect assassination, designed to sow maximum chaos and blame. The cage's guards moved to intercept, but they were too slow. Sakura's eyes widened, her muscles tensing to act, but she too was a fraction of a second too late. The kunai never landed. It stopped, a foot from Mifune's throat, hovering in midair. There was no visible force, no shimmer of chakra. It simply hung there, defying gravity. A sudden, inexplicable gust of wind swept through the sealed chamber, extinguishing every torch on the walls and plunging the room into semi-darkness. In the disorienting moment that followed, Naruto moved. He didn't use a body flicker technique. He simply was no longer by the table, and was now standing beside the assassin. His hand resting gently on the man's shoulder. "Root," Naruto said, his voice devoid of all warmth. It was as cold and final as a glacier. "Still poisoning the ground you claim to protect." The lights flickered back on. The assassin was frozen, paralyzed by Naruto's touch. The floating kunai clattered to the floor. "This man is a Konoha shinobi," Kuretsuchi snarled, pointing an accusatory finger. "This is a declaration of war. Look closer, Tsuchikage," Naruto said calmly. He reached out and pulled down the assassin's collar, revealing a cursed seal on his tongue, the mark of a root operative. A seal that prevents him from speaking of his masters. A poison on the blade designed not just to kill, but to dissolve chakra networks, a specialty of Danzo's labs. And a throwing style that prioritizes silence over speed, taught to only one unit in Konoha's history. This was not an attack by Konoha. It was an attack on this summit. He laid out the evidence with the simple, irrefutable clarity of a master strategist. He hadn't just stopped the threat. He had dissected it, exposed its origins, and revealed the true enemy without throwing a single punch. He had turned their own plot against them. The cage were silent, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and a new, more profound level of fear. This being was not just powerful. He was intelligent, he was perceptive, and he was a dozen steps ahead of them all. He had shown them that the true threats were still lurking within their own ranks, and that he was the only one in the room who had seen it coming. He assassin was taken into custody by the samurai, his face a mask of disbelief. The summit was no longer a debate about Naruto, it was a frantic scramble to root out the conspiracy he had just exposed. He had earned their grudging respect, but he had also cemented their terror. A god was among them, and he saw everything. Later that evening, after the chaos had subsided, Sakura found Gaara staring out a window at the falling snow. We are going to question the assassin, Gaara said without turning. The samurai have agreed to allow it. I would like you to be there. Your medical expertise may uncover something their methods cannot. Quote, of course, Kazekage-sama, Sakura replied. They walked together to the deepest, most secure cell in the Land of Iron's fortress. The air was cold, the silence absolute. When the heavy steel door was opened, they were met not with a defiant prisoner, but with a scene of inexplicable horror. The root assassin was slumped against the far wall, his eyes wide w. Ith a terror that had been frozen on his face at the moment of death. His skin was gray and sunken, clinging to his bones like dried parchment. The cell was untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no lingering traces of foreign chakra. But the man was a husk. Sakura rushed to his side, her hands glowing green. She didn't need a full diagnostic. She could feel it instantly. The same impossible, terrifying emptiness. It's the same as the attacker in Konoha, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. His chakra, it's gone. Every last drop. Something was in this sealed room with him. Gaara knelt, his own sensory abilities confirming her words. He looked at the desiccated corpse, then at the sealed door, and a single, chilling realization washed over them both. The enemy they were facing was not just political. It was not bound by walls or guards. The hunger Naruto had spoken of was real. And it was here. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Hand That Heals, the Hand That Strikes. The 5-Cage Summit ended not with a treaty, but with a fractured, paranoid consensus. The cage returned to their villages with the chilling knowledge that a conspiracy was festering within the very foundations of the shinobi world. And that a god now walked among them who could see its every move. Naruto's intervention had prevented a war, but in its place, he had left a simmering, global unease. He was no longer just a Konoha issue. He was a variable that had been introduced into the world's most delicate equation, and no one knew how to solve for it. Back in Konoha, the weight of that equation settled squarely on the shoulders of Konohamaru and his council. Reports from their intelligence network confirmed that the other villages were simultaneously purging their own ranks and bolstering their border defenses. The peace, once a sturdy bridge between nations, had become a tightrope, and everyone was afraid to take the next step. Amidst the political maneuvering and the hushed, fearful conversations, Naruto did the one thing no one expected. He sought out Sakura. He found her not in a council room, but where she was most herself, in her office at the Konoha General Hospital, buried under a mountain of patient charts and research notes. The air smelled of antiseptic and strong tea. She looked up as he entered, her eyes weary but sharp. If you're here for another existential debate, I'm afraid you'll have to schedule an appointment. I have a budget review at noon and a triple organ transplant at 3. A faint smile touched his lips. Nothing so grand, he said. He gestured to the organized chaos of her office. The hum of activity from the hallway, the palpable sense of purpose that filled the building. I wish to understand this era. Not the politics or the wars, I know those all too well. I want to understand the peace you have built, the life you fight to preserve. He paused, his gaze meeting hers directly. To do that, I must understand how this world heals. And you, Sakura Haruno, are the heart of this village's healing. I am asking for your permission to observe you at your work. The request was so simple, so devoid of guile or divine arrogance, that it completely disarmed her. She had been preparing for demands, for pronouncements, for the kind of world-altering requests a god might make. Not this. He wasn't asking to be worshipped or obeyed. He was asking to watch, to learn. Her pragmatic mind saw the opportunity immediately. It was a chance to study him, to gauge his temperament, to find the limits of his patience and power in a controlled environment. But a deeper, more curious part of her was simply intrigued. You'll stay out of the way, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You will not interfere with my staff or my patients. You will not use your abilities to fix things. Medicine is a science of limits, of hard choices. I won't have you treating my hospital like a divine playground. You have my word, Naruto replied, his expression serious. I am here only to see. And so began the strangest apprenticeship in Konoha's history. Naruto became a silent shadow in the bustling halls of the hospital. He stood in the corner of operating theaters, watching with an unnerving stillness as Sakura and her team performed miracles of modern medicine. He watched her hands, glowing with precise, life-giving chakra, as they knitted tissue, restarted hearts, and coaxed life back from the brink. He saw the sweat on her brow as she fought for hours on a single, complex case, her focus absolute. He followed her on her rounds, a silent presence as she moved from room to room. He saw her gentle humor as she coaxed a frightened child into taking his medicine. He saw her unyielding firmness as she lectured a stubborn Jonin, who had ignored his post-injury recovery plan. He saw the profound exhaustion that settled deep in her bones at the end of a 20-hour shift, an exhaustion she bore without complaint. One afternoon, they stood together in the intensive care unit, watching over an elderly shinobi whose body was finally failing after a long and storied life. His family was gathered around him, their quiet grief a heavy blanket in the room. Sakura had done everything she could. There was no jutsu left to try, no medicine that could turn back the tide of time. "Why do you not intervene?" she asked quietly, her yes fixed on the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. "You rebuilt the village wall with a thought. You could surely mend the failing organs of one old man. And then what?" Naruto responded, his voice a low murmur. "Do I grant him another year? 10, 100? Do I do the same for everyone in this hospital? For everyone in this village? Where does it end, Sakura? At what point do I stop being an observer and become the one who decides who lives and who dies? That is a power I will not wield. Your fight, the one you wage every day against the inevitable, is what gives life its meaning. The struggle is what makes the moments of peace and health so precious. To erase that struggle would be to erase their humanity." His perspective was so vast, so ancient, that it shifted her own. She saw her daily battles not just as a doctor's duty, but as a vital part of a cosmic balance. A respect that went beyond his power began to form in her mind. He was not just a being of immense energy, he was a being of profound wisdom. Her respect was reciprocated. He was in awe of her. He had seen countless warriors, leaders, and sages over the centuries. But he had never seen a will like hers. A will that did not seek to conquer or rule, but to mend, to heal, to defy death itself, not for glory or power, but for the sake of one more sunrise for a stranger. It was this quiet, growing understanding that made them the first to notice when something went terribly wrong. It began with a single patient, a Chunin recovering from a routine injury. His chakra levels, which should have been stabilizing, began to fluctuate wildly. Sakura's diagnostic jutsu revealed nothing, no infection, no internal bleeding. Then a second patient showed the same symptoms. Then a fourth, and a seventh. They were all in the same wing of the hospital. Within a day, the symptoms worsened. A strange, blackish pattern, like a creeping mold, appeared on the patient's skin, centered around their chakra points. Standard medical ninjutsu had no effect. In fact, it seemed to make it worse. When a medic tried to channel their healing chakra into one of the afflicted, the black marks flared, and the medic was thrown back, their own chakra recoiling as if poisoned. "Quarantine this entire wing," Sakura ordered, her voice tight with urgency. "Full biological containment protocols. No one in or out without my authorization. Get me a sample of that tissue, now." The atmosphere in the hospital shifted from a place of healing to a fortress under siege. Fear, a far more contagious pathogen than any virus, began to spread through the staff and patients. This was an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy that turned their own greatest weapon, healing chakra, against them. In her lab, Sakura worked tirelessly, analyzing the tissue samples under a chakra-enhanced microscope. The cellular structure was unlike anything she had ever seen. The cells weren't dying, they were being rewritten. A foreign, parasitic chakra was woven into their very essence, dormant until activated by an external healing source. Naruto stood in the lab with her, a silent sentinel. He watched her work, her brow furrowed in concentration, her mind Azor sharp scalpel cutting through layers of data. He could feel the nature of the plague from across the room. It was a cold, deliberate thing. An intricate tapestry of malice. "This is not a naturally occurring disease," Sakura concluded, pushing a stray strand of pink hair from her face. "This is engineered. It's a weapon." As if on cue, a panicked nurse burst in. "Director, it's spreading. We have cases in 2 other wings. And the public, there are rumors." They're saying this plague started when he arrived. She gestured with a trembling hand toward Naruto. The second phase of the attack had begun. It wasn't just a biological assault, it was psychological warfare. The Root Council, from the safety of their hidden bunkers, was using the plague to poison the village's trust in Naruto, painting him as a harbinger of doom. The crisis reached its peak 3 days later. A third of the hospital was under quarantine. Sakura hadn't slept, her face pale with exhaustion, her reserves dangerously low. She had tried every counter-agent, every sealing formula, every medical jutsu in her arsenal. Nothing worked. She was a genius standing before a locked door for which she had no key. She finally slumped into her chair, the weight of her failure pressing down on her. "I can't stop it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "They're dying, and I can't stop it." Naruto, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, finally moved. He walked to her workbench, his presence a calming anchor in the storm of her despair. "You are trying to cure a disease," he said softly. "You are a master of that art. But this is not a disease. Stop thinking like a doctor, Sakura. Think like a shinobi." She looked up at him, confused. "Describe it to me," he said. "Not its cellular makeup or its symptoms. Its chakra, its nature. What is its intent?" The question cut through her exhaustion. She closed her eyes, casting her senses back to the feeling of the corrupted chakra. "It's hungry," she said slowly. "But not for life force. It feeds on the intent to heal. It's spiteful. It's a curse that punishes compassion." "Precisely," Naruto affirmed. He picked up one of the sealed petri dishes containing an infected sample. He didn't open it. He simply held his hand over it, closing his eyes. The air in the lab grew still. Sakura could feel him reaching out with his chakra, not to heal, but to listen. "It is a jutsu," he explained. His eyes still closed. "A highly complex one, woven into a virus. It uses yin release to give a form and a will to a concept, the concept of decay. It doesn't attack the body. It convinces the body to attack itself by corrupting the very energy that sustains it. And it is powered by the cells of the first Hokage, twisted and perverted to serve as a perpetual engine for the curse." His explanation was a key, sliding into the lock she couldn't open. Her eyes widened with a sudden, brilliant flash of understanding. "So I can't overpower it," she breathed. Quote, "I've been trying to fight a fire with oil. I don't need a cure. I need a counter-jutsu." "Yes," Naruto said, opening his eyes. They glowed with an ancient light. "A frequency that will unravel the programming. A command that will tell the cells to remember their true purpose." A new energy surged through Sakura. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was overshadowed by fierce determination. She wasn't beaten yet. "I can do that," she said, her voice ringing with renewed confidence. "I can isolate the frequency of the curse and create a precise, opposing wave of chakra. It would be like a key fitting a lock. It would neutralize the yin release programming on a cellular level." It was a feat of chakra control and medical genius that no one else in the world could have even conceived of, let alone attempted. But as she prepared to begin the delicate work, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The plague's ambient, corrupting influence in the lab was taking its toll. "You are too exposed," Naruto stated. He moved to stand directly behind her as she sat at her workstation. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "And you are nearly out of chakra." A wave of pure, clean energy flowed from his hands into her. It wasn't the raw, overwhelming power of a tailed beast. It was calm, steady, and impossibly vast, like drawing water from the ocean itself. It refilled her reserves, sharpened her senses, and pushed back the encroaching weariness. More than that, it formed a protective shield around her, a bubble of serene power that insulated her from the plague's malevolent aura. "Work," he said simply. "I will be your shield." Quote, trusting him completely, Sakura turned her full attention to the task. What followed was a symphony of genius. Guided by Naruto's fundamental understanding of the curse's nature, she began the painstaking process of creating its opposite. It was a dance on the edge of a knife, requiring a level of control that was breathtaking. For hours, the only sounds in the lab were the hum of equipment, Sakura's quiet commands to her medical tools, and the steady, silent flow of power from Naruto's hands. Finally, with a soft cry of triumph, she held up a syringe filled with a softly glowing emerald green serum. This is it, she panted, a triumphant smile gracing her exhausted face. The counter-agent, the key. She didn't have the strength to stand. As the adrenaline faded, the accumulated exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She slumped back, and Naruto was there to catch her, his arms preventing her from falling. For a moment, she rested against him, the solid, unwavering strength of his presence more comforting than she could have imagined. In that moment, he was not a god. He was her partner. The cure worked perfectly. Within hours, the plague was eradicated, the black marks receding from the patient's skin as their bodies were reminded of how to heal themselves. Konoha breathed a collective sigh of relief, though the seeds of suspicion that had been planted still lingered in the shadows. Later that night, Naruto stood watch in Sakura's office as she slept in a chair, her head resting on her desk amidst her triumphant but scattered notes. He looked at the woman who had faced down a weaponized curse and won, not with divine power, but with her own intellect and indomitable will. His search for a bride had been a search for an equal. He was beginning to realize that equal did not mean equal in power. It meant equal in spirit. Konohamaru entered the office, his expression grim. "We found them," he said quietly, holding up a report. "The distribution point for the virus. It was a network of old root bunkers, just as you suspected. They used the old civilian aqueducts. The evidence is undeniable." He paused, looking from the report to Naruto. "They weaponized the first Hokage's legacy." Naruto's gaze shifted from the sleeping woman to the city lights beyond the window. "They take that which gives life and twist it to cause death," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "They take trust and forge it into a weapon of fear. It is their way, and it is a way that cannot be allowed to endure." He understood now that his desire for a peaceful, mortal connection was inextricably linked to the protection of the world where that connection might grow. And protecting this world meant protecting the fierce, brilliant, and utterly human woman who was its heart. The hand that heals and the hand that strikes were two sides of the same coin, and he knew, with a certainty that echoed through his ancient soul, that he would have to be both. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A storm from the heavens. The peace that followed the plague's eradication was fragile, a thin pane of glass waiting for the next stone. For a few days, a semblance of normalcy returned to Konoha. Sakura threw herself back into the rhythm of the hospital, the familiar challenges of medicine a comforting anchor after the surreal horror of the engineered curse. Naruto, true to his word, remained a quiet observer, his presence becoming a strange, accepted part of the hospital's daily life. A silent god in a sterile corridor, watching the methodical, human fight against mortality. But the sky, which had been a brilliant, clear blue, was beginning to watch them back. It began subtly. The air grew heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on one's arms stand up. The clouds on the horizon, which should have been white and wispy, were a bruised, unnatural purple-gray, and they were gathering with a purpose that defied meteorology. Shinobi WITH weather forecasting skills reported impossible readings, a pressure drop so severe it should have heralded a typhoon, yet there was no wind. It was a storm holding its breath. By midday, the sky directly over Konoha was a churning vortex of black cloud. No rain fell, no wind blew, but a low, resonant hum vibrated through the air, a sound felt in the chest more than heard with the ears. Civilians looked up from their daily errands, their faces pale with a primal fear. This was not weather. This was a judgment. Then, from the heart of the vortex, lightning struck. It was not a natural, jagged bolt, but a perfect, incandescent spear of pure energy that slammed into the training grounds on the village outskirts. The ground erupted, sending a plume of molten earth hundreds of feet into the air. The sound was a deafening crack that shattered windows for miles. Before the Shinobi Defense Corps could even react, a figure descended from the sky, riding the fading energy of the lightning bolt as if it were an elevator. He was a being of arrogant power, clad in armor that seemed forged from storm clouds and crackling electricity. His white hair whipped around a face that was handsome, cruel, and etched with an ancient, divine pride. He carried no weapon, because the storm itself was his weapon. His voice boomed, not through amplification, but because it was the sound of thunder-given speech. "I am Susanoo, Lord of the Tempest, God of the Raging Storm. I have come for the pretender who hides among these mortal insects." The pressure of his presence was immense, a crushing weight that forced weaker shinobi to their knees. It was raw, untamed, chaotic power, a stark and violent contrast to Naruto's deep, calm ocean of energy. "You, who calls himself god of shinobi?" Susanoo roared, his glare sweeping over the village below. "You have abandoned your station. You have debased yourself, walking in the dirt with these ephemeral creatures. Your weakness is a blight upon the divine order. Face me, prove you are worthy of the power you hoard, or I shall cleanse this world of your stain and take it for myself." The threat was absolute. He wasn't there to negotiate or posture. He was there to conquer, to destroy, and to claim dominion. Just as panic was about to shatter the village, a second figure appeared, standing atop the Hokage monument. Naruto had not moved with speed, he had simply emerged from the air. A point of absolute stillness in the heart of the brewing tempest. "Your grievance is with me, Susanoo," Naruto called out, his voice calm yet carrying effortlessly over the divine hum. "These people have no part in it. Your challenge is accepted, but not here." Susanoo laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "You dare dictate the terms of your own execution. This world is my battlefield now. Pretender." He raised a hand, and a dozen more spears of lightning coalesced in the clouds above, aimed at the heart of the village. Naruto didn't flinch. "If a single one of those touches this village," he said, his voice losing its warmth, becoming as cold and vast as the space between stars, "I will not simply defeat you. I will unmake you." For a breathtaking second, the two divine wills clashed. The air crackled, and reality itself seemed to groan under the strain. Susanoo, for all his bluster, felt a flicker of true fear. He was looking at something far older and more absolute than himself. He lowered his hand, the lightning bolts dissipating with a resentful hiss. "Fine," the storm god snarled. "Choose your grave. It makes no difference to me." Naruto turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Sakura, who was standing on the hospital roof, her face a mask of horrified awe. He gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent promise. Then, he raised his hand and pointed toward the desolate, rocky badlands far to the south, the site of forgotten battles. There, with a gesture, he enveloped himself and the fuming storm god in a vortex of swirling energy. It was not wind or light, but a distortion of space itself. In an instant, they were gone. The oppressive pressure over Konoha vanished. The black clouds began to break apart. The sun shone through, but no one celebrated. They had just witnessed a declaration of war between gods. "Get me a long-range sensory team," Konohamaru barked, his voice shaking but firm. "I want to know what's happening. Sakura-san, I need you too." "I'm going," Sakura said, her voice resolute. She was already weaving hand signs. "We need to see this. We need to understand what we're dealing with." With a flicker of movement, she and a hand-picked team of Anbu, including Captain Sai, vanished, racing across the treetops at their maximum speed toward the coordinates of a divine duel. They arrived to a world being torn apart. The Badlands, a place of rock spires and deep canyons, was now a maelstrom. Susanoo was in his element, a figure of pure elemental fury. He moved on the wind, his body a conduit for the storm's wrath. Gigantic tornadoes, wide enough to swallow a small village, tore through the canyons, pulverizing stone into dust. Lightning, no longer in precise spears but in chaotic, web-like sheets, rained from the sky, glassing the ground where it struck. And in the center of it all stood Naruto, a figure of impossible calm. He wasn't dodging, he wasn't blocking, he was conducting. As a tornado of unimaginable force bore down on him, he raised a hand, not to create a wall, but to make a simple, elegant gesture. The funnel of wind, which should have ripped him to shreds, simply unraveled. The violent, rotating winds became a gentle breeze that ruffled his hair before dying completely. He hadn't fought the storm, he had commanded it to be still. A sheet of lightning that could power a city for a year descended upon him. Naruto didn't erect a shield. He simply stomped his foot on the ground. The earth around him responded, and a dozen rock spires, drawn by some unseen force, shot up from the ground, acting as perfect lightning rods, harmlessly diverting the cataclysmic charge deep into the planet's core. From their vantage point on a distant ridge, Sakura and the others could only watch, their senses screaming at the impossibility of it all. Shinobi manipulate chakra to create elemental effects. Naruto was manipulating the elements themselves. He wasn't using jutsu. He was issuing commands to reality. And reality was obeying. He's not even fighting back, Sai noted, his artist's eye capturing the scene with a detached horror. He's just negating him. Susanoo's rage grew with every failed attack. He was a god of destruction, and his destruction was being calmly, effortlessly undone. It was the ultimate insult. With a final, deafening roar, he decided to end it. If this world prefers your silence, then I will give it the ultimate silence of the void. He bellowed. He began to draw upon his full divine authority. The sky for 100 miles turned black. All sound ceased. The air thinned, becoming hard to breathe even for the shinobi watching from afar. He was gathering the entirety of the atmospheric energy in the region, compressing it into a single point above his head, a swirling, crackling sphere of white-hot plasma and negative pressure. It was an attack designed not just to kill, but to annihilate, to wipe a scar across the face of the planet. As the catastrophic attack formed, Naruto closed his eyes. For the first time, Sakura felt a surge in his chakra. But it wasn't the energy of a tailed beast. It was something deeper, older. The very air, the earth, the faint traces of life in the barren rocks around him, all of it began to resonate with him. Natural energy, pure and untainted, poured into him not like a river, but like an ocean. The ground around him began to glow with a soft, golden light. Orange pigment, the mark of a sage, appeared around his eyes, but it was more profound, more absolute than any sage Jiraiya or he himself had ever displayed in his youth. It was as if he had become the nexus of the entire planet's life force. And in that moment of immense, divine power gathering, Naruto felt it. A faint, cold, hungry tender, ill of consciousness reaching out from the shadows of the world. The lingering will, it was drawn to the conflict, attracted to the feast of divine energy being prepared. It was a scavenger waiting for the gods to wound each other so it could feed on the scraps. Naruto ignored it. His focus was absolute. Susanoo unleashed his final attack. The sphere of annihilation descended, erasing the very air as it fell, leaving a perfect vacuum in its wake. Naruto opened his glowing, sage-like eyes. He did not create a shield or a counterattack. He did something far more profound. He clapped his hands together once, a single, sharp sound that was the only noise in the soundless world. And he created a zone of perfect calm. It was an invisible sphere of influence that expanded from him. Inside it, chaos simply could not exist. The raging plasma of Susanoo's attack entered the sphere and was instantly pacified. The unimaginable energies were smoothed out, the violent reactions neutralized, the destructive intent rendered inert. The attack didn't explode. It just ceased to be, dissolving into a harmless, shimmering aurora of light that danced beautifully in the air before fading away. Susanoo stared, his divine power utterly spent, his mind broken by the sheer conceptual dominance of what had just happened. He had thrown a star, and his opponent had told it to go to sleep. Naruto appeared before him, the golden glow fading from his form. The storm god, now drained and vulnerable, collapsed to his knees. "You speak of divine order," Naruto said, his voice quiet but echoing in the now silent wasteland. "The first rule of that order is that we do not use mortals as pawns in our disputes. You have forgotten that. You have forgotten that our power is meant to preserve the balance, not shatter it for the sake of pride." He raised a hand. A shimmering, golden gate, a portal to a different realm of existence, tore open in the fabric of space behind Susanoo. "You are banished from this world. Go back to the heavens and reflect on your arrogance. If you return, I will not be so merciful." Without another word, an unseen force lifted the defeated god and cast him through the portal, which snapped shut with a sound like tearing silk. Silence. The reshaped canyons, the fields of glassed sand, the smell of ozone, and the unnatural quiet were all that remained. Sakura and her team slowly approached, their feet crunching on the fused earth. She looked at Naruto, who stood in the center of a crater of his own making, a crater formed not by destruction, but by its absolute negation. He didn't look triumphant. He looked profoundly weary, the ancient loneliness back in his eyes. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Naruto nodded, his gaze distant. During the height of the energy release, it was watching, waiting. It is drawn to power. A battle like this, it's a dinner bell. He looked around at the catastrophic, continent-altering damage he had been forced to negate. This was the result of a duel he had tried to avoid, a duel that had solved nothing and only served to announce his presence to an even greater threat. His search for a mortal connection, for a quiet life, had led him here, to a battlefield scarred by a fight between gods, under the hungry gaze of a world-devouring parasite. He had won the battle, but his true problem, the problem of his very existence, had just become infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Weight of a Name. The banishment of a god did not go unnoticed. While the battle itself had been in a desolate wasteland, the atmospheric and seismic phenomena had registered on every mystic and scientific instrument from the land of waves to the deepest deserts of the land of wind. The cage, already on edge, received reports from their sensory divisions that described a power fluctuation so immense it defied classification. It was as if someone had briefly turned a second sun on and off. There was only one possible source. Naruto's effortless victory should have cemented his authority, a clear sign that challenging him was futile. But Homura and the remnants of Root were masters of turning strength into a perceived weakness. In the shadowed corners of the international community, they did not spread rumors of Naruto's power, but of his instability. He attracts chaos, their agent. Whispered in the courts of daimyo and the back rooms of merchant guilds. First a plague, now a rival god descends from the heavens to challenge him on our soil. He is a magnet for calamity. Konoha claims he is a guardian. But all he guards is his own power. How long until the next divine squabble levels a city? The narrative was insidious and effective. Fear, once directed at Naruto's power, as now being subtly redirected toward his very presence. He was no longer a potential weapon for Konoha, but a liability to the entire world. Back in the village, Naruto was grappling with the same conclusion. He stood with Sakura on the newly repaired northern wall, looking out over a peaceful, thriving Konoha. The tranquility felt temporary, fragile. He was not the first, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. And he will not be the last. There are other realms, other pantheons, beings who have watched this world for eons. My prolonged presence here, in a mortal form, is a disruption to an ancient balance. It is a sign of perceived weakness to some, an opportunity to others. Sakura crossed her arms, a troubled frown on her face. So what is your plan? You can't just play Celeste. I'll whack a mole every time some arrogant deity decides to test you. The world wouldn't survive it. I know, he admitted, a deep weariness in his voice. My hope was to live quietly, to observe. But my very name, the power it represents, makes that impossible. It is a weight that reshapes the world around me, whether I wish it or not. It was at that moment that Homura played his masterstroke. An alarm klaxon, a sound not heard since the last Great War, shrieked across the village. It was not the signal for an external attack, but the deep, internal pulse of a maximum security prison breach. A message flashed across the Hokage's emergency broadcast system, a message that chilled every shinobi to the bone. The Iron Vault has been opened. The blood prisoners are free. The Iron Vault was Konoha's darkest secret. A subterranean prison, sealed with the most powerful fuinjutsu imaginable. It held the shinobi who were too powerful, too fanatical, or too psychologically damaged to ever be allowed to see the light of day. They were the fanatical remnants of rogue factions, failed experiments from Orochimaru's labs, and, most prominently, the most zealous and deadly of Danzo Shimura's former captains. Shinobi who had been deemed too extreme even for Root. They were called the blood prisoners because their only loyalty was to the spilled blood of the past. Konohamaru, Naruto, and Sakura stood in the shattered remains of the vault's entrance. The massive, chakra-infused steel doors were not blown open, they were peeled back like the lid of a can. The sealing formulas, each a masterpiece of Uzumaki craftsmanship, were not broken, but unwritten, their intricate patterns dissolved into nothingness. No one in this world has the fuinjutsu knowledge to do this, Konohamaru said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. No one except. He trailed off, his gaze landing on Naruto. The implication was as thick as the dust-filled air. Naruto was the only being alive with the skill to so completely and utterly dismantle Uzumaki sealing arts. This is their move, Sakura said immediately, her eyes narrowed. They couldn't frame you for the assassination at the summit, so they've escalated. They're framing you for unleashing the village's worst nightmares. Before Naruto could respond, a Jonin messenger appeared in a swirl of leaves, his face ashen. Hokage-sama, a message has been sent to the other 4 great nations. It's a recording. It shows him, he gestured to Naruto, standing before the vault. It shows him raising his hand as the seals dissolve. It was a perfect frame job. A genjutsu doctored image, but one so masterfully crafted it would be impossible to disprove in time. The Root Council had not just released a dozen S-rank threats, they had Dek. Led Naruto Uzumaki, an enemy of the peace, a tyrant releasing ancient evils to solidify his power. They're not just trying to isolate Konoha, Naruto said, his voice dangerously calm. They are trying to force the other villages into a coalition against me, to create a war big enough to hide their own ascent to power. The blood prisoners did not flee the village. That was not their way. They were fanatics, and their first act was to bring their bloody crusade back to the village that had imprisoned them. Chaos erupted across Konoha. One of them, a man known as Kyo, whose body was a grotesque patchwork of grafted Kekkei Genkei, appeared in the marketplace. He could project concussive blasts of sound from his palms and turn his skin into a diamond-hard shield. He began systematically demolishing buildings, laughing maniacally. Another, a wraith-like woman named Setsuna, was a master of a forbidden Hyuga technique that didn't just block chakra points, but permanently destroyed them with a single touch. She moved through the Shinobi Corps barracks, a phantom of death turning elite Jonin into chakra-less civilians with a single, horrifying touch. The Shinobi of Konoha, for all their strength and skill, were outmatched. They were a generation of peacekeepers, of shinobi who fought to capture and subdue. The blood prisoners were relics of a bygone era. They fought only to kill, and they did it with a ruthless efficiency that was terrifying to behold. Naruto knew he couldn't be everywhere at once. Konohamaru, he said, his voice cutting through the panic. Coordinate the defense. Focus on evacuation and containment. Do not engage them in prolonged combat. They are too dangerous. Sakura, your medical teams are the priority. Keep them safe. I will hunt. With that, he vanished. He was not a god of storms or a grand spectacle of power now. He was what he had been in his youth, a hunter. A predator. And his prey were the monsters that had been unleashed in his name. His first target was Kyo. The man was reveling in the destruction, swatting aside a team of Uchiha police like flies. Naruto appeared behind him, a silent specter in the burning marketplace. Kyo spun around, a triumphant sneer on his face, and unleashed a full-power sonic blast, a shockwave that could liquefy organs. The blast hit Naruto and did nothing. It washed over him, not even rustling his clothes. Naruto simply stood there, his expression unreadable. Impossible, Kyo roared, his confidence faltering. No one can withstand my sound release. Sound is merely a vibration in the air, Naruto stated, taking a calm step forward. I have told the air around me not to vibrate. Before Kyo could process the sheer conceptual absurdity of that defense, Naruto's hand shot out. It wasn't a punch or a strike. He simply placed his palm on Kyo's chest. The diamond-hard defense, the stolen Kekkei Genkei that had made him invincible, turned to dust. All the foreign chakra grafts, the unnatural power sources stitched into his body, were instantly and completely neutralized. Kyo stared down at his own chest in horror as his power evaporated. He was just a man again. A single, clean strike to the back of the neck, and he fell. Unconscious. One down. Meanwhile, Sakura was facing her own battle. The Wraith Setsuna had infiltrated the hospital, her goal clear, to cripple Konoha's ability to heal. Akira confronted her in the main surgical theater, the gleaming steel and advanced equipment a stark contrast to the ancient, deadly art Setsuna wielded. Your hands bring life, Setsuna whispered, our voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Mine bring the eternal silence. A perfect symmetry. She lunged, her fingers extended like claws. Sakura didn't meet her head-on. She knew she couldn't risk a single touch. Instead, she slammed her foot into the floor, shattering the reinforced tiles and sending a shockwave of debris toward her opponent. Setsuna danced through it, ethereal and untouched. This was not a battle of strength, but of precision. It was a surgeon against an assassin who used the body's own life force as a weapon. Sakura used her unparalleled knowledge of the chakra network not to heal, but to predict. She could see the flow of Setsuna's intent, the way her chakra gathered in her fingertips just before a strike. She dodged and weaved, the deadly fingers missing her by millimeters. The air crackling with their passage. It was the most terrifying dance of her life. Just as Setsuna feinted left and struck right, aiming for the critical nexus of nerves at Sakura's shoulder, a golden chain, impossibly fast, shot out from the hallway. It wrapped around Setsuna's wrist, not restraining her, but completely isolating her chakra. The adamantine sealing chains. Naruto walked into the theater. His face grim. He had dealt with the others. Setsuna was the last. "It is over," he said. The woman, trapped and powerless, threw her head back and laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Over. You fool. This was never about us. We were just the key. The distraction." At that moment, from the hidden root headquarters deep beneath the village, Homura initiated the final phase of his plan. He didn't activate a weapon. He activated a microphone, a broadcast sent to a secure, pre-arranged channel that every cage and their top advisors were now monitoring. "Leaders of the 5 great nations," Homura's withered voice announced, filled with a feigned desperation. "My name is Homura Mitokado. I am an elder of Konoha, and I am broadcasting this message against the orders of my Hokage, at the cost of my own life. The being known as Naruto Uzumaki has seized control of our village. He has released our most dangerous prisoners to crush our defenses. He is a tyrant. We are his first conquest. But we will not be his last. Do not trust Konoha. Do not trust their pleas. They are the puppet of a false god. For the good of the world, you must act." It was a brilliant, suicidal move. A respected elder, a contemporary of the third Hokage, seemingly sacrificing himself to deliver a dire warning. It was a lie so perfectly crafted, so rooted in their deepest fears, that it was almost impossible to disbelieve. Sakura, listening to a relay of the broadcast from a communication device, felt a cold dread wash over her. They had been outmaneuvered, while they were fighting the physical battle in the village. Root was winning the political war across the continent. They had successfully painted Naruto as a monster and turned the entire world against him. But as Homura finished his speech, preparing to end his own life to sell the lie, a new voice cut into the broadcast. A calm, resonant voice that every cage now recognized. "Thank you for your confession, Elder Mitokado," Naruto said. Homura froze. The voice wasn't coming from the transmitter. It was coming from right behind him. He spun around. Naruto was standing there, in the heart of the most secret, most heavily warded bunker in Konoha. His arms crossed. "A clever plan," Naruto continued, his voice now being broadcast to the entire world's leadership. "You use my power to unseal the vault, but you use a genjutsu to place my image there. You unleash chaos and then use that chaos as proof of my tyranny. You sacrifice yourself to become a martyr, cementing the lie. It is flawlessly executed." "How?" Homura stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. "No one can enter this place. You think in terms of walls and seals," Naruto said, taking a step forward. "I do not. But your mistake was not in your strategy. It was in your assumption. You assumed I would be so busy fighting your berserkers that I wouldn't notice the source of the chakra powering the global broadcast jutsu you are using." He gestured to the complex array of scrolls and amplifiers. "A unique signature. One I have been tracking since you used it to spy on the cage summit." He had been playing a different game all along. He had let them think they were controlling the narrative while he was simply following the threads back to the spider at the center of the web. He walked over to Homura and placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. He didn't threaten him. He didn't hurt him. He simply connected. He flooded the elder's mind with a sliver of his own perception, a glimpse of the vast, interconnected web of life and chakra he saw every moment of every day. He showed him the truth. The cage, listening with rapt attention, heard Homura's sharp intake of breath. They heard the clatter of a kunai as it dropped from a trembling hand. And then they heard the elder's voice. No longer defiant, but broken, filled with a terrifying, soul-shattering awe. He sees everything," Homura whispered into the open mic. "Every lie, every secret, it's all connected. The shadow, the rabbit goddess, she promised to save us from this absolute clarity. Homura collapsed, his mind shattered not by an attack, but by a moment of pure, undiluted truth. In that single, brilliant counter-move, Naruto had not just proven his innocence. He had exposed the entire conspiracy, revealed its leader, and forced a confession on an international stage. Using their own trap to do it, his mind, it was now terrifyingly clear, was an even greater weapon than his power. The weight of his name had been used against him. But he had just shown the world that he was the one who defined what that name meant. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Fire in the Heart. The aftermath of the Root Council's gambit was a global political earthquake. With Homura's confession broadcast to the leadership of every nation, the conspiracy that had festered for generations was laid bare. A swift, brutal, and coordinated purge began across the continent as the cage, now united by a common enemy and a shared sense of dread, rooted out the last vestiges of Danzo's ideology from their ranks. Konoha was not isolated. It was, for the first time, at the center of a truly unified shinobi world. But it was a unity born of fear as much as trust. They had all witnessed, firsthand, that Naruto was not just a force of nature, but a political and strategic mind beyond their comprehension. For a brief, strange period, an almost unnatural calm settled over the village. The blood prisoners were re-interned in a new vault of Naruto's own design, sealed not with jutsu that could be unwritten, but with a conceptual lock that bound them to their own life force. The village repaired the damage, the shinobi corps took a collective breath, and the world held its own, waiting to see what the god in their midst would do next. Naruto, however, did nothing. He did not issue edicts or demand tribute. He returned to his quiet observation, to the simple, human rhythms of the village he was trying to join. He and Sakura fell into a comfortable, unspoken routine. He would often appear in her office late at night, not to talk, but simply to be a silent precinct. While she finished her mountainous paperwork, he would walk with her through the hospital gardens, listening as she spoke of her day, of the small victories and the heartbreaking losses. In these quiet moments, the godhood fell away. He was just Naruto, a man with ancient eyes and an impossibly patient soul. She found herself talking to him not as a deity, but as a confidant, the only person in the world who could truly understand the crushing weight of responsibility she bore. He, in turn, saw in her a strength that rivaled any divine power he had ever witnessed, the strength to face down death every single day and never, ever surrender. A bond, forged in crises and tempered in quiet understanding, was deepening into something neither of them had expected, but both had begun to cherish. It was this growing closeness, this burgeoning island of peace in his turbulent existence, that the lingering will chose as its next point of attack. It knew it could not challenge him with brute force. The battle with Susanoo had proven that it had failed to break him with political maneuvering. So it decided to attack the one thing he had not shielded, the one thing he had willingly left vulnerable, his heart. The vessel it chose this time was not a warrior. It was a respected, retired jonin named Kosuke, a man known for his gentle demeanor and his mastery of yin-release genjutsu, which he now used to help shinobi suffering from post-traumatic stress. He was a healer, a man trusted by everyone, including Sakura. And he was the perfect, unassuming host. The attack did not begin with an explosion. It began with a whisper. Sakura was performing a delicate nerve regeneration on a young chunin who had lost the use of her legs. As she focused her chakra, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye distracted her for a half-second. A shadow that looked, for a terrifying instant, like her own hands were coated in the blood of the patient. She blinked, and it was gone. She shook her head, attributing it to exhaustion. Later that week, walking home, she heard a child's voice call her name. She turned, but the street was empty. The voice had sounded achingly familiar. It sounded like a young Sasuke Uchiha, calling her name as he had on the day he left the village, the day her world had broken. The incidents grew more frequent, more personal. She would be in her office and suddenly smell the cloying, antiseptic scent of the makeshift field hospital from the Fourth Great War, the scent of death she had never been able to forget. She would see fleeting images in reflective faces. The broken body of a comrade she had failed to save, the disappointed face of her master Tsunade, her own younger self, weeping and helpless. She told no one. She was Sakura Haruno, the rock of Konoha's medical core. She did not admit to weakness. She pushed it down, attributing it to stress, to lack of sleep. But the whispers were getting louder, the visions more vivid. They were feeding on her deepest insecurities. Her most painful memories, the silent failures she carried like scars on her soul. The entity was being clever. It was not a direct assault. It was a slow, methodical erosion of her will, designed to isolate her, to make her doubt her own sanity, to break her spirit from the inside out. It had correctly identified the source of her incredible strength, her indomitable will. And it was targeting that will with surgical precision. Naruto noticed the change in her. He saw the new, subtle lines of tension around her eyes, the way she would sometimes pause, her gaze distant, as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. He didn't press her. He knew she would come to him when she was ready. But he began to watch, not just her, but the world around her, with a new, heightened vigilance. He could feel a cold, subtle wrongness in the air, a discordant note in the symphony of life, but its source was maddeningly elusive. The breaking point came during a public ceremony honoring the heroes of the recent plague crisis. Sakura was on stage, receiving a commendation from the Hokage. As she stood at the podium, ready to give a speech, she looked out at the cheering crowd. But she didn't see their adoring faces. She saw a field of corpses. The entire village square was filled with the dead and dying, the faces of everyone she had ever failed to save staring up at her with hollow, accusing eyes. The cheering was a cacophony of screams. At the center of it all, her younger self stood, pointing a finger at her, her face streaked with tears and blood. "This is your fault," the illusion whispered, its voice echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence of her mind. "You're not strong enough. You never were." Sakura stumbled back from the podium, her breath catching in her throat, her hands flying to her head. The world swam before her eyes. The illusion was so powerful, so viscerally real, that it had completely overwhelmed her senses. She was drowning. In that moment of absolute psychic crisis, the vessel made its move. Kosuke, the gentle healer, stepped out from the crowd. To the onlookers, he was rushing to help a hero who seemed to have fainted. His face was a mask of concern. But in the distorted reality of Sakura's vision, his form wavered, becoming a shadowy, monstrous figure, its hand outstretched not to help, but to deliver the final, soul-shattering blow. Before his hand could touch her, another hand caught his wrist in an iron grip. Naruto was suddenly there, standing between them. He had moved with an impossible, silent speed, appearing on the stage without a sound. He had not been fooled by the concerned citizen act. His senses, tuned to the very fabric of reality, had felt the spike of malevolent yin-release chakra, the cold touch of the lingering will as it went in for the kill. "Get out of her head," Naruto said, and his voice was not the calm, patient tone she had grown used to. It was the voice of a god pronouncing judgment. It was a command that echoed not in the air, but in the psychic space the entity had created. The horrifying illusion of the dead shattered like glass. The world snapped back into focus. Sakura gasped, falling to one knee. The real sounds of the panicked crowd rushing back in. She saw Naruto holding Kosuke's wrist, the old man's face now twisted into an inhuman snarl. "You cannot protect her forever, old one." The voice that came from Kosuke's mouth was a dry, sibilant hiss, ancient and full of hate. It was Kagaya's voice, filtered through a stolen throat. "Her heart is full of cracks. So easy to break. She is your weakness, the mortal anchor that will drag you down." "You were mistaken," Naruto said, his eyes glowing with a cold, blue fire. "She is not my weakness. She is my strength." Naruto didn't attack the vessel. He knew the entity would simply abandon the host and flee, leaving a dead man behind. He turned his full attention, his entire divine will, inward, focusing it on Sakura. He placed his free hand on her shoulder, and she felt not a wave of chakra, but a wave of absolute, unwavering truth. He wasn't healing her. He was reminding her of who she was. "You are not your failures, Sakura." His voice echoed in her mind, a beacon of clarity in the lingering chaos. "You are the will that rises after every fall. You are the hands that have saved thousands. You are the heart that has never stopped fighting. Do not let a shadow tell you who you are. Remember." His strength wasn't meant to fight her battle for her. It was a support, a foundation she could stand on to fight it herself. And in that moment, Sakura Haruno remembered. She rose to her feet, her green eyes blazing with a fire that eclipsed Naruto's. The remnants of the genjutsu, the lingering whispers of doubt and fear, were burned away by the sheer force of her will. She looked at the possessed man, at the ancient evil wearing a familiar face, and she felt no fear. Only a cold, focused rage. "You want to see a weakness?" Sakura said, her voice dangerously quiet. She took a step forward, and the ground beneath her feet cracked under the force of her contained power. "You come into my home. You threaten my people. You use the face of a good man. And you dare to throw my past in my face." She raised her fist, and the green glow of her medical chakra was subsumed by the overwhelming power of the strength of 100 seal. Intricate markings spread across her body. This was not the controlled release of a healer. This was the unrestrained fury of a warrior who had stood on the front lines of a war against gods. "Let me show you what I've learned from it," she roared, and lunged forward. The entity, shocked by her recovery and the sheer ferocity of her spirit, tried to release its host and flee. But it was too late. Naruto's grip on Kosuke's wrist was absolute, a divine anchor holding the parasite in place. It was trapped. Sakura's punch was not aimed at Kosuke. She slid past him, her attack aimed at the empty space just beside his head. She struck the air itself, but with such focused, concentrated force that it created a shockwave that was both physical and psychic. The reality around the possessed man buckled. The entity, the lingering will, was torn from its host by the pure, concussive force of a mortal's unyielding spirit. A shadowy, amorphous form was blasted out of Kosuke's body, screeching a silent, soul-tearing scream as it was exposed. Before it could dissipate, Naruto clenched his fist. Golden chains erupted from the ground, wrapping around the shadow, binding it tight. But even as it was captured, the entity delivered its final, chilling prophecy. It coalesced into a spectral image of the rabbit goddess, her third eye blazing. "The vessel is chosen," her voice echoed, not in the air, but directly in their minds. "The mother will return. The world will sleep." With that, the shadow dissolved, the chains finding nothing left to hold. It had sacrificed a tiny piece of itself to deliver its message. Kosuke collapsed, unconscious but alive, freed from his violation. The crowd was in a panicked uproar. The world had just witnessed an invisible battle, a struggle for the soul of one of its greatest heroes. In the ensuing chaos, as the Anbu secured the area, Naruto and Sakura stood together on the stage, the world forgotten for a moment. He looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion that went far beyond respect or admiration. It was awe. She had faced down an enemy that had tried to devour her from the inside out and had won with her own strength. "You were right," Sakura said, her voice still trembling slightly, but with adrenaline, not fear. "It used my past against me. My cracks. They are not cracks," Naruto replied, his voice soft. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek she hadn't realized had fallen. "They are proof that you have lived. That you have fought. They are the source of your strength, not its absence." In that moment, under the shocked eyes of their village, he leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound, absolute recognition. It was a silent acknowledgement of the fire he had seen in her heart, a fire that burned brighter than any divine light. He had come to the mortal world seeking a connection, and in the heart of its greatest healer, its fiercest warrior, he had finally found it. He had found a spirit that was truly his equal. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Chosen Vessel. The kiss was a cataclysm in miniature. On the grand stage, under the terrified eyes of the entire village, it had been a defiant, profound statement. In the quiet that followed, it was an unexploded bomb. The world had seen it. Konohamaru, in a rare moment of political genius, had spun it to the public as a divine blessing, a symbolic gesture of the god of Shinobi's commitment to Konoha's greatest hero. The story was clumsy, but it was enough to quell the immediate panic and give the village a narrative to cling to. For Naruto and Sakura, it was far more complicated. They stood on the precipice of a canyon that had opened between them, the space between god and mortal. Between friend and something more. The air in Sakura's office, once a place of comfortable silence, was now charged with unspoken questions. It was a tactical error, Sakura said, her act to him as she meticulously organized a set of surgical scrolls that were already in perfect order. Public displays of affection are strategically unsound, especially when one of the parties is a geopolitical entity of immense and terrifying power. Her voice was clinical, detached, the tone she used to diagnose a difficult case. Naruto stood by the window, watching the moon cast long shadows across the village. Was that what it was? A tactical error? What else could it be? She countered, finally turning to face him. Her green eyes were guarded. I am a mortal woman who will be old when this village's newest saplings are ancient trees. There is no practical future. It was a moment of impulse, brought on by a crisis. We should move past it. He met her gaze, his own eyes holding the patient, unyielding depth of the ocean. You are the most fiercely practical person I have ever known, Sakura Haruno. You have never, in all the time I have watched you, done anything without reason. Do not insult us both by pretending that was a mere impulse. He took a step closer, and the air in the room seemed to compress. I did not kiss a symbol. I did not bless a hero. Is the woman who stood against an ancient darkness and refused to break. The woman whose fire I felt in my own soul. He paused, his voice softening. I am weary of practicality, Sakura. I have lived for centuries by the grand, cold logic of gods. I came here for the illogical. For the warmth of a fire in a world that is all too often cold. Her defenses wavered. He wasn't arguing. He was simply stating his truth. A truth as solid and undeniable as the ground beneath their feet. Before she could find the words to respond, a chilling memory intruded, a discordant note in the fragile harmony of the moment. The prophecy, she whispered, the warmth draining from her face. The vessel is chosen. It wasn't just a threat. The entity wasn't just boasting. It was telling us it had found its champion. Naruto nodded. The shift in topic as seamless as the turning of a page. It sacrificed a part of itself to deliver that message. It was a declaration. While it was distracting us, breaking itself against your will. Its main consciousness was elsewhere, securing its ultimate weapon. But who? Sakura pressed, her mind racing through the possibilities. Who has enough power to be a worthy vessel for a will that wants to consume the world? All the major threats are gone. The Akatsuki, Madara, Obito, they're ghosts. A vessel doesn't have to be a willing one, Naruto said grimly. It just needs to be strong. And empty enough for a new will to take root. An empty vessel filled with pride, resentment, and a lust for power. His eyes became distant, his senses reaching across dimensions, is the most dangerous kind of all. Quote, in a realm of endless, violent twilight, where the very air was a chaotic storm, Susanoo raged. He had been banished, stripped of his dignity, cast out from the mortal world by a pretender who fought not with glorious fury, but with a quiet, insulting finality. He tore a mountain of jagged, crystalline rock from the landscape with a blast of lightning and shattered it into dust with another. But the act brought him no satisfaction. His power, once his pride, now felt hollow. It was the power of a king with no kingdom, a god with no worshippers. He was a being of pure pride. And that pride had been shattered. It was in this state of impotent fury, of divine humiliation, that the voice came to him. It was not a sound, but a thought, sliding into his mind like a serpent through grass. Such power, such magnificent rage, wasted in this empty place. Susanoo spun around, his armor crackling. Who dares? A friend, the voice whispered, coiling around his ego. One who also knows the sting of betrayal. One who has seen the god of Shinobi, for what he is. A miser, hoarding a power he does not deserve, a power that should belong to true divinity. A shadow coalesced before him. It had no definite shape, but he could feel its ancient hunger, its profound, cosmic ambition. It was the lingering will. I have no need of friends, Susanoo spat. Especially not bodiless whispers. But you have a need for revenge, don't you? The will purred. You threw a star at him, and he told it to be quiet. He did not defeat you. He dismissed you, an insult a true god cannot bear. What if I told you there was a way to reclaim your honor? A way to gain a power that would make his look like a flickering candle? What power? The storm god growled, his interest piqued despite himself. The power of the beginning. The power of the progenitor, from which all of this world's energy flows. The power of the Otsutsuki. The shadow pulsed, and an image flooded Susanoo's mind. He saw the 10 tails. A beast of unimaginable power. He saw the infinite Tsukuyomi, a jutsu that could bend all of reality to his will. He saw himself standing before a defeated Naruto, absorbing his divine essence. Becoming the one, true god of all realms. It was a vision of absolute victory, of ultimate vindication. What is your price, Shadow? Susanoo demanded, his voice thick with desire. Price? There is no price. It is a partnership, an alliance. The will's form solidified slightly, taking on the vague, horned silhouette of Kagaya. My ambition needs a vessel strong enough to enact it. Your rage needs a focus. A weapon sharp enough to pierce a god's heart. Let us merge. Your will shall be the hand, and mine shall be the sword. Together, we will finish what my first incarnation began. We will bring a final, perfect order to this chaotic little world. It was a perfect temptation, a poison tailored to his specific pride. The shadow offered him everything he craved: power, revenge, and the restoration of his divine honor. In his rage and humiliation, he saw no trap. He saw only opportunity. Show me this power, Susanoo commanded, his voice trembling with anticipation. As you wish, the lingering will replied. The shadow lunged forward, not as an attack, but as an embrace. It poured into Susanoo, merging with his divine essence. The storm god screamed, a sound that tore through the twilight realm. It was a scream not of pain, but of terrible, ecstatic transformation. His armor of crackling clouds hardened, turning a bone white and forming intricate, sharp angles. Horns, like those of an Otsutsuki, tore through his brow. His hair bled of all color, becoming a stark, lifeless white. His chaotic storm energy, once a brilliant blue, became a sinister, consuming black. Shot through with veins of malevolent crimson. And then, as the transformation reached its apex, a vertical slit opened on his forehead. It blinked once, revealing a third eye, its iris a blood-red pattern of rings and tomo. The Rinne Sharingan. He was no longer Susanoo, the arrogant storm god. He was something new, something terrible, an avatar of divine rage fused with a world-ending ambition. Far to the north, in the land of lightning, Killer Bee was composing a new rap, balancing precariously on the tip of the highest mountain peak in the cloud ravine. Gyuki, the 8 tails, grumbled in the back of his mind. Your rhymes are getting rusty, Bee. Mighty mountain and gushing fountain. Just a warm-up, for my public, you see. Got the flow of a river, the sting of a bee. Yo, Bee rhymed back, striking a pose. It was then that the sky went black. Not the gradual darkening of a storm, but an instantaneous eclipse. The wind died. The temperature plummeted. A vortex of black and red clouds, identical to the one that had heralded Susanoo's first appearance but infinitely more powerful, formed above the ravine. Uh-oh, Bee said, his playful demeanor vanishing instantly. That ain't no regular cumulonimbus. Fool ya fool. From the heart of the vortex, the new Susanoo descended. His presence was a physical blow, a wave of palpable malice and overwhelming power that caused the very mountains to groan. Jinchuriki of the 8 tails, the corrupted god stated, his voice a layered chorus of his own arrogant tone and the will's sibilant whisper. Surrender the beast, and I will grant you a quick death. Surrender. That ain't my style, you hear what I'm sayin'. Bee shot back, already erupting in the crimson chakra cloak of the 8 tails. You mess with the bull, you get the horns. And the tentacles, ya dig. In the village of Kumogakure below, alarms blared. Darui, the rakage, felt the monstrous chakra signature and swore, grabbing his cleaver. It's a tailed beast level threat. All units, move. The battle was joined. Bee transformed instantly into his full, colossal 8 tails form, a towering octopus bull of pure chakra. He opened his mouth and fired a tailed beast bomb. A sphere of compressed, positive and negative chakra that could vaporize a mountain. Susanoo simply raised a hand. The third eye on his forehead blazed. The tailed beast bomb flew toward him, and then, impossibly, it stopped, shrank, and was absorbed into the palm of his hand without a sound. It was the power of the Preta path, magnified to a divine scale. My turn, Susanoo hissed. He thrust his other hand forward, and a storm of lances made of black lightning, each crackling with the same destructive energy as the tailed beast bomb he had just absorbed, shot toward Gyuki. The 8 tails roared, spinning its tentacles to create a massive shield, but the black lances pierced through them, exploding with concussive force and searing its flesh. Darui and the shinobi of the cloud arrived, unleashing a coordinated assault, Gale-style, Black Hunting Pack. Darui roared, sending a swarm of panthers made of black lightning to attack the new god from all sides. Susanoo didn't even turn. The panthers slammed into an invisible wall around him and dissipated. Insects, he spat. He waved a hand, and a gravitational wave, the almighty push, on a scale that any pain had ever wielded, erupted from his body. The entire shinobi force, including the rakeage, was blasted back, sent tumbling through the air like discarded dolls. This was not a fight. It was a harvest. Gyuki, wounded and enraged, charged, attempting to crush the god under its immense bulk. Susanoo met the charge with a single, outstretched hand. He drove his fingers into the tailed beast's flesh, and instead of being crushed, he began to drain its chakra directly. The 8 tails bellowed in pain and fury as its life force was siphoned away. With a final, terrible roar, Susanoo unleashed his new power. Chains of pure, black energy erupted from his body, wrapping around the struggling tailed beast. These were not the adamantine sealing chains of the Uzumaki. They were a divine, twisted perversion. A jutsu designed not just to seal, but to extract. Killer Bee was forcibly ejected from the tailed beast's form, his body crashing to the ground, limp and smoking. The chains tightened, and with a sound that tore at the very soul of the world, Gyuki, the mighty 8 tails, was ripped from its host and compressed into a struggling, grapefruit-sized sphere of pure energy in Susanoo's hand. The corrupted god looked down at the devastation, at the wounded rakeage, the near-dead Jinchuriki, and the smoldering remains of the cloud ravine. He had won, effortlessly. He didn't need to speak aloud. He closed his eyes, and his third eye broadcast his will across the globe, a psychic scream that every sensor, every cage, and every tailed beast felt with agonizing clarity. The first has been gathered. 8 remain. His voice echoed in their minds. The god of shinobi hides behind his mortal walls while his world burns. Let him watch as I reclaim what is mine. The infinite moon will rise again. In Sakura's office, the quiet intimacy of moments before was shattered. Naruto staggered back, his hand flying to his head as the psychic message tore through his consciousness. He felt it all. Susanoo's corrupted power, Gyuki's terrified scream, and B's life force fading to a flicker. Sakura felt it too, a wave of cold dread that had nothing to do with psychic powers and everything to do with a doctor's intuition. Naruto, what is it? What's happened? He looked at her, and the ancient calm in his eyes was gone, replaced by a storm of his own. The game was over. The hunt had begun. The enemy had a name, a face, and a terrifying goal. The vessel has been chosen, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. And he's started his collection. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Sage's Legacy. The news of the 8 tails capture and Killer Bee's near death fell upon the world like a shroud. Susanoo's psychic proclamation was not a threat, it was a statement of fact, a promise of a methodical, inevitable apocalypse. Panic, a sentiment that had been kept at bay by diplomacy and military might for a generation, began to creep back into the public consciousness. Black markets sprung up overnight selling fraudulent protection charms. Doomsday cults that worshipped the coming, infinite moon, gained followers. The fragile peace, built over decades, began to show its crack. Under the pressure of a truly existential threat, an emergency war council was convened in Konoha, not just of the cage, but of the entire allied shinobi forces. The great hall was a sea of grim faces. On a massive screen, a live feed showed Killer Bee in a state-of-the-art medical stasis, Sakura's best long-distance protégés working under her remote guidance to keep his life from guttering out completely. Darui, the rakeage, stood before the council, his arm in a sling, his face a mask of cold fury. We engaged him with everything we had, Darui said, his voice a low growl. He absorbed a tailed beast bomb like it was a raindrop. He repelled an entire battalion with a wave of his hand. His power is absolute. This is not a shinobi. This is a natural disaster in the shape of a man. Gaara, his expression as still as the desert sand, spoke next. Shukaku has gone into hiding. Kurama is here with Naruto. But the others, Matabi, Isobu, Son Goku, Kokuo, and Seiken, are scattered. They are powerful, but they are not an army. If he hunts them one by one, he will succeed. We cannot win a direct confrontation. Every strategic simulation, every tactical analysis run by Shikamaru and his team, came to the same conclusion. To fight Susanoo's current form was to lose. To concentrate their forces was to present a bigger target. To scatter was to be picked off. They were strategically checkmated. Naruto stood before the map of the world, a silent, imposing figure. He had been quiet throughout the meeting, listening to the reports, the analyses, the growing despair. He felt the weight of every fearful gaze in the room. They were looking to him, their god, for a miracle, for a jutsu that would solve the unsolvable problem. Gaara is right, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. A direct battle is a losing battle. We are fighting a storm. You cannot punch a hurricane into submission. So what do we do? Kuretsuchi demanded, her usual bluster replaced by a raw frustration. Do we just wait for him to collect the whole set and end the world? No, Naruto said, turning from the map to face them. His eyes were not those of a warrior planning an attack, but of a scholar who has finally found the one book he was looking for in a library of millions. We change the nature of the fight. He is fighting a war for power, for chakra. We must fight a war of purpose, of will. He has fused a god's pride with an Otsutsuki's ambition. It is a powerful combination, but it is also a volatile one. A parasite latched onto a host. And parasites can be removed. He looked directly at Sakura. A silent communication passing between them. I am going to find a way to perform a kind of surgery. Not on a body, but on a soul. I am going to separate the lingering will from Susanoo. A ripple of confusion went through the council. Is such a thing even possible? Chojuro asked timidly. I do not know, Naruto admitted, his honesty doing nothing to soothe their nerves. But the Sage of Six Paths, my ancestor, was a master of creation and division. He split the 10 Tails power into 9 living beings. He gave form to concepts. His legacy is not just one of power, but of knowledge. That knowledge must be somewhere. Where? Konohamaru asked. In a place that no longer exists on any map, Naruto replied. The sage's hermitage. A place where he meditated on the nature of reality itself. A place hidden not by space, but by concept. He turned to Sakura. I will need your help. This journey will not be a test of power. The trials will be of intellect, of compassion, of understanding the fundamental balance of life and spirit. I can provide the key, but you are the only one who can turn it. The plan was met with stunned silence. Their god was proposing to leave the battlefield on the eve of the final battle to go on a spiritual quest for a theoretical jutsu. Shikamaru was the first to grasp the logic. It's a drag, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. But it's the only move we have. A desperate gamble is better than a guaranteed loss. He looked at the other cage. The rest of us will have to buy them time. We will run the greatest eyeing action in the history of the world. The new strategy was born of desperation and a sliver of hope. The allied shinobi forces would become the world's shield. Their goal was not to win, but to slow Susanoo down. They would use hit-and-run tactics, guerrilla warfare, misdirection, and strategic retreats. They would spread his focus, harry his flanks, and make the hunt for each tailed beast as costly and time-consuming as possible. They would bleed for every second Naruto and Sakura needed. The journey to the sage's hermitage began not with a step, but with a thought. Naruto took Sakura's hand, and the bustling war room dissolved around them. They were not traveling through space, but through a conceptual realm, a corridor of pure thought that connected the tangible world to its spiritual underpinnings. Colors bled into sounds, memories felt like solid objects, and the air itself was thick with the raw, untamed energy of creation. They emerged into a place of impossible tranquility. They stood on a floating island of verdant grass under a sky of swirling, nebula-like colors. A single, ancient tree stood at the center of the island, its branches heavy with fruits that glowed with a soft, internal light. A gentle waterfall flowed from nowhere, its water disappearing into a mist at the island's edge. This is it, Naruto breathed, a note of reverence in his voice. The sage's hermitage, the nexus of his meditation. As they approached the ancient tree, a figure materialized from its trunk. It was not a man, but a being of pure, golden light, vaguely humanoid in shape. It had no face, but they could feel its ancient, questioning gaze upon them. You seek the legacy. The being's voice was not a sound, but a direct impression on their consciousness. Many have searched. None have been worthy. The path to true understanding is guarded by 3 trials. The trial of the mind, the trial of the heart, and the trial of the soul. We are ready, Naruto stated simply. The being of light gestured to a shimmering gate of energy that appeared beside the waterfall. Then let the trial of the mind begin. Enter, and face the illusion of truth. Naruto and Sakura stepped out the gate and found themselves in a library that stretched to infinity. Every wall was lined with shelves that disappeared into the sky, each shelf holding millions of scrolls. The answer you seek is here. The guardian's voice echoed around them. The technique to divide a soul from its power. It is written in one of these scrolls. You have until the last grain of sand falls in this hourglass to find it. An enormous hourglass, as tall as a man, appeared in the center of the room. The sand was already flowing. Sakura looked at the impossible number of scrolls and felt a wave of despair. This is impossible. It would take 1,000 lifetimes to even read a fraction of these. Naruto closed his eyes. He said to face the illusion of truth. This library, the sheer volume of information, this is the trial. It's designed to overwhelm. Sakura's mind, honed by years of medical diagnosis, suddenly saw the pattern. It's a trick question, she breathed. We're not supposed to read them. We're supposed to find the right one. It's a diagnostic challenge. She looked at Naruto. The sage created the tailed beasts. He didn't just divide the power, he gave them personality, consciousness. He didn't just perform a jutsu. He performed a creative act. The scroll we're looking for wouldn't be filed under Fuinjutsu, or Soul Division. It would be filed under something else. Creation. Naruto finished for her. His eyes snapping open. The principles of yin-yang release. Giving form to the formless. They began to move through the infinite library, no longer looking at titles, but sensing the nature of the knowledge within. Naruto, with his vast understanding of chakra, could feel the broad strokes, the temperature, of the different sections. Sakura, with her precise control and diagnostic mind, could pinpoint the subtle variations, the specific frequencies, of the individual scrolls. They worked in perfect sync, a divine compass and a surgeon's scalpel. With only moments to spare on the hourglass, Sakura stopped before a simple, unadorned scroll on a low shelf. This one, she said with absolute certainty. I can feel it. The chakra signature inside, it's balanced. It speaks of division, but also of mending. It's not a weapon, it's a tool. Naruto reached out and took the scroll. As his fingers touched it, the infinite library dissolved, and they were back on the floating island. The guardian of light inclined its head. You have passed the trial of the mind. But knowledge without compassion is a sharp blade with no handle. A second gate, this one pulsing with a soft, red light, appeared. The trial of the heart. Enter, and face the echo of consequence. This time, when they stepped through, they were in Konoha. But it was a broken, burning Konoha. The sky was a sickly red, choked with ash. Susanoo, his power now absolute after absorbing all 9-tailed beasts, stood astride the rubble of the Hokage monument, the entire world's population trapped in the glare of the infinite Tsukuyomi. Their bodies bound to the roots of a monstrous god tree. But the Susanoo before them was not the real one. It was an echo, a manifestation of their failure. And standing before him, her eyes empty and reflecting the red moon, was an echo of Sakura. You were too slow, the echoed Sakura said, her voice hollow. You sought a perfect solution while the world died. Your quest for knowledge cost them everything. From the roots of the god tree, illusions of their friends, Konohamaru, Gaara, Shikamaru, cried out in silent agony. The trial was clear. It was a test of their conviction. It was designed to fill them with a guilt so profound that it would break their spirit. This is not real, Naruto said, his voice firm, though his hands were clenched into fists. Is it not? The echo of Susanoo boomed. This is the price of your gamble. This is the world you will create if you fail. Sakura looked at the image of her village in ruins, her friends enslaved. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to unleash her fury on the phantom before her. But she remembered Naruto's words. This is not a test of power. She looked at the hollow-eyed echo of herself, at the silent screams of her friends. Her heart ached with a pain so sharp it was physical. But beneath the pain, her healer's spirit saw the truth. No, Sakura said, her voice clear and strong. She walked forward, not toward the monstrous god, but toward the illusion of herself. This is not the price of our gamble. This is the reason for it. She stopped before her despairing echo and placed a hand on its shoulder. Our friends are fighting to give us this chance. Their sacrifice is not a burden of guilt for us to carry. It is a shield of faith for us to hold. We don't dishonor them by feeling guilty for their courage. We honor them by succeeding. As she spoke, a gentle, healing chakra flowed from her hand into the echo. The despair in its eyes lessened, replaced by a flicker of hope. The illusion wavered. The echo of Susanoo roared in frustration, raising his hand to strike her down. But before he could, Naruto stepped in his path. He did not prepare a defense. He simply looked up at the god of ruin and spoke. You are the embodiment of our fear, Naruto said. And we will not be ruled by fear. His words, filled with an absolute, unshakable faith in Sakura and their friends, were the final blow. The illusion shattered. The burning Konoha, the god tree, the phantoms, they all dissolved into light. They were back in the hermitage. The guardian nodded slowly. You have passed the trial of the heart. You understand that true strength is not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. The scroll in Naruto's hand unrolled of its own accord. The characters on it glowed with a divine light. Flowing into his mind, he saw it, the ultimate technique of the sage. It was a jutsu of profound and terrible balance. It could indeed separate a soul from the power latched onto it, cleaving the parasite from the host. But the price was exactly as he had feared. The jutsu required a perfect sympathetic resonance. To sever an external power source from a soul, the U.S.er had to sever their own connection to a great external power source. It was a law of equivalent exchange, written into the fabric of reality. For Susanoo, it would mean severing his connection to the lingering will. For Naruto, it would mean severing his connection to his own divinity. He would have to sacrifice his godhood, pouring that conceptual authority into the jutsu to power it. He would be left as he was born, a powerful shinobi, a descendant of the sage, the Jinchuriki of Kurama, but mortal. Utterly, completely mortal. The final trial, the guardian's voice intoned, as the knowledge settled in Naruto's mind. The trial of the soul. You know the price. Are you willing to pay it? Sakura looked at him, her eyes wide with understanding. She saw the choice before him, to remain a god, to live forever as the world's lonely guardian, or to give it all up for a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance, to save them. He didn't hesitate. He looked at her, at the mortal woman he had come to love, at the world she fought so desperately to heal, and he smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile, free of the ancient weight he had carried for so long. To protect the world I wish to join, he said, and the woman I wish to join it with. It is no price at all. He had passed the final trial. The knowledge was his. The path was clear, but the clock was ticking, and the shield of the allied shinobi forces was beginning to crack. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Final Sunrise. The shield was breaking. Across the frozen, shattered plains of the Land of Frost, the allied shinobi forces were fighting a battle they could not win. The very air was their enemy, thick with a divine pressure that made every breath a struggle, every jutsu a monumental effort. Craters, miles wide and fused into black glass, scarred the tundra where tailed beast bombs had been casually swatted aside. Gaara stood atop a colossal wave of sand, his face grim, the gourd on his back cracked and weeping dust. His ultimate defense, once thought to be impenetrable, had been breached a dozen times. He was no longer trying to stop the enemy, merely to slow him, to throw up wall after wall of earth and sand, buying seconds with tons of rock. Further east, Darui and the remnants of the Kumo vanguard fought a lightning war against a god of lightning. Their attacks, including his own Black Panther technique, were absorbed and turned back against them. Amplified 100-fold, they fought with a grim, suicidal tenacity, their only goal to be an annoyance, a distraction. And at the strategic center, in a bunker miles from the front line, Shikamaru Nara stared at the tactical map, his face illuminated by the glowing markers, and for the first time in his life, he was out of moves. Every feint, every trap, every gambit had been met with overwhelming, contemptuous force. "He's not even treating this like a battle," Shikamaru muttered to the shell-shocked Ino beside him. "He's treating it like he's weeding a garden." Above the chaos, Susanoo hovered, a figure of bone white and black malice. He was untouched, his armor pristine. In shimmering spheres of containment around him floated the captured essence of six-tailed beasts. A crown of stolen power. He had spent the last several days dismantling the world's defenses with the bored indifference of a child pulling the wings off a fly. Now, he was tired of the game. "Your resistance has been noted," his layered voice echoed across the battlefield, a psychic pronouncement of doom. It was pathetic, but noted. Now, witness the dawn of a new, silent world. He raised his hands. The spheres of tailed beast energy began to spiral inwards, merging with his own chakra. A monstrous, gnarled tree of pure, malevolent energy began to erupt from the frozen ground behind him, its branches clawing at the sky. It was the god tree, reborn. Simultaneously, the moon, visible even in the pale daylight, began to bleed to a dark, ominous red. The third eye on Susanoo's forehead pulsed, its Rinne Sharingan pattern glowing with world-ending power. The infinite Tsukuyomi was beginning. The end had arrived. As a collective wave of despair washed over the remaining shinobi, two figures appeared on the battlefield. They did not arrive in a flash of speed or a puff of smoke. They simply stepped out of the air and into reality, standing on a lone, untouched mesa between the charging god tree and the battered allied forces. Naruto and Sakura had returned. Susanoo paused, his attention drawn to the newcomers. He felt Naruto's presence, but it was different. Calmer, sharper. And beside him, the mortal woman stood, not cowering, but with a gaze as steady and defiant as his own. "The pretender returns," Susanoo sneered, a flicker of genuine hatred in his voice. "Have you come to beg for the lives of your pets? It is too late. The moon is ready. The world will finally sleep. Your new master has a limited imagination," Naruto replied, his voice calm and clear. Yet it carried across the entire battlefield, cutting through the wind and the rising hum of the god tree. "An eternal dream is not peace. It is the ultimate prison." He looked at Susanoo, his eyes filled not with rage, but with a profound, almost sorrowful focus. "The parasite that has taken root in your soul, Susanoo. I am here to remove it." The corrupted god threw his head back and laughed, a sound that cracked the very glaciers around them. You will be the first soul I feed to the tree." He lunged, not with a jutsu, but with a movement that bent space itself, crossing miles in an instant, his hand outstretched, shaped into a blade meant to impale Naruto where he stood. He never made it. Naruto met his charge, and the resulting collision was not a sound, but a deafening silence. A perfect sphere of annihilated reality expanded from the point of impact, erasing a square mile of the battlefield from existence. The real battle had begun. What followed was a war between TWO forces operating on a level that defied shinobi comprehension. Susanoo, wielding the corrupted powers of the Otsutsuki, was a force of absolute destruction. He fired all-killing ash bones, rods disintegrated everything they touched on a molecular level. Naruto countered not by blocking them, but by subtly rewriting the physical laws in their path, causing them to decay into inert calcium a foot from his body. Susanoo ripped a meteor from the heavens, pulling it down upon the battlefield. Naruto, with a single gesture, accelerated its descent and shattered it against an invisible plane of force, turning it into a beautiful but harmless shower of superheated dust in the upper atmosphere. This was his final symphony as a god, every movement a perfect expression of conceptual power, a final, glorious expenditure of the divinity he was about to sacrifice. And amidst this cataclysm, Sakura ran. Her mission was simple, and it was impossible. While Naruto engaged the god in a duel that was tearing the sky apart, she had to get close enough to place a single, tiny chakra marker on Susanoo's body. It was the anchor, the focal point for the sage's jutsu. She was a blur of pink and green against the stark white of the battlefield. The ground buckled and warped around her. Shockwaves that could pulverize granite washed over her, forcing her to channel chakra to her feet just to remain upright. She wasn't fighting. She was surviving. Her medical knowledge, her perfect understanding of the human body, allowed her to move with an efficiency that bordered on precognition, dodging falling debris and energy blasts by predicting the trajectory of the chaos. Kazekage Sama, she yelled into her comms unit. Now, from miles away, Gaara, his face beaded with sweat, thrust his hands forward. A massive, claw-like shield of sand erupted from the ground, not to attack Susanoo, but to intercept a wide-arc gravitational pulse that would have flattened Sakura. The sand shield disintegrated into individual grains, but it had bought her 3 seconds. She pushed forward, her 100 healing seal blazing on her forehead, instantly mending the minor cuts and burns that the sheer proximity to the battle was causing. She was a scalpel, seeking a precise point of entry in the heart of a nuclear explosion. Susanoo, enraged by Naruto's flawless defense, unleashed a new attack. Black receivers, the same rods used by Pain, but infused with divine power, erupted from his palms, shooting towards Naruto. Naruto met them with his own truth-seeking orbs, a dance of absolute creation against absolute control. The clash created a blinding flash of light. Sakura used the moment of sensory overload. She pushed her chakra to its absolute limit, a desperate, final dash. She saw her opening, the back of Susanoo's greave. The one spot his attention wasn't focused on. She was almost there. An invisible wall of force, the god's passive defensive aura, slammed into her. She was thrown back, tumbling through the air, her ribs cracking on impact as she hit the frozen ground. The pain was immense. The seal on her forehead glowed furiously, knitting bone and torn muscle back together, but her momentum was lost. She looked up, gasping for air, and saw Susanoo turning, his primary eyes, filled with contempt, locking onto her. He had noticed the gnat buzzing at the edge of his perception. He raised a hand to obliterate her. But in that instant of distraction, Naruto acted. He wasn't there. Then he was, a golden flash of the flying Raijin technique he had not used in centuries. He delivered a single, perfect blow to the side of Susanoo's head, a Rasengan infused with the planet's own natural energy. It wasn't designed to kill, but to disorient, to shatter the god's focus for a single, crucial second. Susanoo staggered, his divine senses ringing. It was the opening Sakura needed. Pushing through the agony, fueled by a will that had refused to break in the face of psychological torment, she lunged. She didn't have the strength for a proper leap. It was a desperate, stumbling crawl, then a push, her hand outstretched. Her fingers brushed against the cold, bone-white armor of his heel. The chakra marker, a small, intricate seal formula, flared green for a microsecond and then vanished, perfectly applied. Now, Naruto, she screamed, her voice raw, pouring the last of her strength into the cry. Naruto heard her. He was already moving back, putting distance between himself and his foe. Susanoo, recovering his senses, looked down and finally saw the faint glimmer of the seal. A flicker of confusion, then dawning horror, crossed his face as he realized he had been played. He turned his full, murderous intent on Sakura. But it was too late. Naruto stood 50 yards away, his feet planted firmly on the broken earth. He brought his hands together in a single, unfamiliar seal, the ram seal of the sage. "This world does not belong to you," he said, his voice quiet, yet it was the only thing that mattered. "It does not belong to your ambition, or to his pride." He invoked the sage's legacy. He performed the jutsu. There was no explosion, no grand burst of energy. There was only a wave of silent, pure white light that expanded from Naruto's body. It was not a destructive force, it was a conceptual one. It was the principle of division made manifest. It washed over the battlefield, and as it passed, everything became still. When the light touched Susanoo, he screamed. It was a sound of pure, spiritual agony. He felt an invisible, irresistible force taking hold of the very essence of his being. The lingering will, the parasitic consciousness of Kagaya that had merged with him, was being torn away. A shrieking, spectral form of the rabbit goddess was ripped from his body, clawing at him. Trying to hold on, but the jutsu's logic was absolute. And as Naruto's power severed the bond in his enemy, he felt the equivalent exchange happen within himself. It was a feeling more profound than any pain. The cosmic connection he had held for centuries, the sense of being one with the fabric of the universe, his divine authority over reality, it snapped. The world, which had always been a quiet symphony he could conduct, suddenly became a cacophony. He felt the biting cold of the wind on his skin, the crushing weight of gravity on his bones, the frantic, asperate pounding of his own human heart in his chest. The silence of godhood was replaced by the roaring noise of mortality. He was falling. With the last vestiges of his divine power, he completed the sealing. The shrieking, formless will was compressed into a sphere of pure malice. Naruto looked to the sky, and with a final act of creation, he forged a new, small, lifeless moon in the upper atmosphere. He cast the sphere into it, sealing the lingering will in a cold, dead prison of rock for all eternity. A final tomb for a world-devouring ambition. The light faded. Susanoo, his Otsutsuki features receding, his third eye closing and vanishing, his armor crumbling into dust, crashed to the ground. He was a man again, mortal and broken, unconscious in the snow. And Naruto, his eyes fading, from their divine glow back to their familiar, human blue, collapsed, his body no longer supported by God's will, but by mere flesh and bone. Sakura, ignoring her own injuries, was at his side in an instant. Her hands glowing with healing chakra as she desperately searched for the source of his collapse. She felt his chakra network. It was still immense, the raging furnace of Kurama's power and the deep, vast well of his own Uzumaki and Senju lineage still present. But the other thing, the cosmic, reality-bending energy that had defined him, it was gone. Completely. The sun began to crest the jagged peaks of the land of frost, its rays casting a golden light over the scarred but silent battlefield. The red moon had returned to its normal, pearlescent white. The god tree crumbled, dissolving into harmless particles. The battle was over. The war was won. Naruto opened his eyes and looked up at Sakura, a faint, weary smile on his lips. He had given up eternity. He had sacrificed his godhood. And looking up at her face, her eyes filled with tears of terror and relief, he felt, for the first time in centuries, not an ounce of regret. He had finally, truly, come home. Chapter 9 End.